Hello and welcome back to module number 8. Today we are going to talk about visual correlation analysis, and we will try to understand what does it means and how in the context of our textbooks what does it apply. But we also going to start reading the second book that I assigned for the class, and which talks about the open source R or RStudio. And so I hope by now most of you already download the RStudio to your desktop, and I'll show you the power of RStudio with regard to what it's called the ggplot2, and this is the type of analysis that you're going to learn in this class until the end of the semester, and I'll show you how to do that with the code and also with what you learn about visual analytics. So this is just what we are going to cover today, but I want to spend few seconds on the quiz, which I thought everyone did excellent, and it's also reflect on me, so which means that I see it is what I convert or communicate well to you and what can I do better. So if you have any recommendation, please do so. My job is not only to lecture you through my computer, but also to teach you how to use the visual communication in order for you to show things that usually it's really hard to do in writing. So with that, let's start with the subject of our module, visual correlation. What is correlation? Correlation is one of the most common methodologies used in statistics. Correlation is a single number that describes the degree of relationship between two variables. I will work with a few examples, but I'm also going to show you examples from the past where people from history use the correlation analysis to display the infographics and visual analytics. So let's start with the definition. What is correlation analysis? Correlation analysis is a measurement between the strength of association between two variables, and usually we are measuring it between +1 and -1, and as a correlation coefficient values go towards 0, which means that the relationship between the two variables will be weaker. So usually in statistics we measure 3 types of correlation, and we are applying that into different type of analysis, and usually we are looking for direction, strength, and shape. One of the things that we are often use or confuse with regard to correlation is that we often think of correlation as regression. So correlation is the use to measure the strength of the association between the two variables. Regression is the idea of predicting the value of the dependent variable versus the independent variable, and that's the difference between the correlation and regression. So the correlation coefficient measures the strength of a linear association between usually two variables, and the best way to use it is person production moment, which is a lot of businesses use in order for them to illustrate. However, if we will look at the history of correlation analysis, Mignard in 1781 used that type of analysis to show how Napoleon, the great emperor of France, tried to occupy Russia. He did not use 2 variables, he used much more, but I want you to see how he applied that into his visualization. So you see, what you see here is 2 basically lines, one in the gray and one in the black. In the gray is the French army trying to occupy the Russians, occupy Russia, and going through the winter, the cold winter of Russia into Moscow. And the black is when they started to escape, and as a result, the Russian army did a lot of things to them that in the end a lot of French soldiers died during this war, and that is considered to be one of the best infographics then ever made. And this is important. So it shows the forces, the comparison between the variables. He shows the causality, the temperature, even though in a correlation we do not show causality. In this case, Méniard used the causality to show the temperature, which is in the bottom, and capture multi variables, which is the size of the army. Again, in the beginning, the French army was big, and in the end, it was very small, and illustrate the high quality of content, accurate data, present the support, and so on and so on. So again, the play of the lines in order for us to tell a story. So the scatter diagram is the display in which other pairs of measurements are plotted on a coordinate system. So the dependent variable is represented by horizontal axis, and the dependent variable represented by y on the vertical axis. The point of representing the data usually plot either by dots or crosses. If we look how to make it, we are going to look at basically two variables, example height versus height, and we will apply the data, and that's what we will get out of it. And as I said before, the correlation coefficient, usually we are talking about plus and minus. If it is plus 1, you will see that the correlation will be on a straight line. If it's positive, we will see a little bit on the side, or there is no straight line. It will not be a smooth line. It will be more than that. If it's going to be low, you're going to see diverse data points throughout the visualization. Again, the same thing happens in negative, and if it's negative, positive, negative, it will be straight line. No correlation, it will be blend all together. Okay, so in R, as I hope that you already install it, simple correlation is very simple. In this case, I'm calling the container, which will be a sample from 1 to 20 with normal distribution of 10 and a standard deviation of 2, and I will going to play with it. And when I will play with it, that will be my display. I will be able to show the X, the variable X, the variable Y, and the variable Z. And by doing that, I'll be able to show the difference between the three variables, and even try to think about that in terms of correlation. So this is a simple idea of it. One of the things that we usually see in open source R is different application or different visual application to convert this open source R into visual. And in this case, Corelate program is an ability to convert it into metrics. So you need to install it, and then you're going to run it in order for you to get something like that. Again, this is the car mileage, and this is how to display that. And again, maybe it's not clear, maybe it can be better, but it is a visual analytics graph that will show you something out of it, will display something about that. So now to the main subject of our module today, which is ggplot2. And this is where the power of open source R is in its best. There's a lot of documentation, a lot of people post their work on ggplot2, and this is just the beginning. And again, this is something that I want you to experience your first hand and to see how it fits into what you think about visualization and how can you customize it. Customize it in the sense that you will take ownership of what you do, play with the code, play with the colors, see how can you apply that in order for you to develop it and to be a power user of ggplot2. So a textbook of ggplot2 is in its outline here, but the person who created ggplot2, Handley, came up with the basic idea of grammar. Grammar has to be coming part of the visual analytics and part of the how do we analyze the data. And this is really important because in your assignment or in your reading for this module, you're going to here we go. You're going to read about graph as a composer of individual components, and this article or this blog breaks down the grammar rules that Handley used in order for him to apply the ggplot2. There is the aesthetic aspect, there's geometric shape, there's the statistical transformation, there is the scale, the facing, and the theme all together blend two in order for us to create a visualization that will make sense to us. So this is the grammar. I don't like to do that, but I want you, if you will have time, I wrote a paper calling Unlocking the Power of Visual Grammar Theory, Analyzing Social Media Political Advertising Message in 2016 US Election. And in this article, I broke down the visual grammar into what we see in the political ads and how we apply that. So that is my connection to it. I think it will be interesting to you to know that even in visual analytics we have some rules of grammar, even though it's not universal rule that we are accustomed to see in English or in mathematics, but we have some rules of grammar that help us to communicate better. So again, this is important. So the grammar of language defines the structure of the words. The grammar of graphics defines the rule for structuring mathematical and aesthetics element into more meaningful graph. So the person who is responsible for that, or to start talking about grammar of graph, was Wilkinson. And he created this book that was published in 1999. Wilkinson took the idea of what it is consists, and the idea was that the ggplot2, the package itself, was built on this idea of the theory. So the outline of the grammar to the ggplot2 based on data. What is the data consist of? The variables that are to be displayed in the graph. The variables are mapped to aesthetics. The geometrics, which is the object. Example, object in this can be points, can be bar. The statistical transformation, usually what does it mean? The mean or the standard deviation or the variance. The scale, which is define the aesthetic value that are mapped to variables. And the coordinate system, which is the background of our ggplot layer. We are all our layers in ggplot2 have a coordinate system. So what we are facing is that we need to display a visual in a coordinate system. And facing is the split of data into subset to create or communicate multiple variables of the same graph. So the data is the part of where we are trying to see if we are going to break it down, what it will help. And the idea here is that we can do multiple data frame in using ggplot2 in order for us to display that. That is define the variable types, which is the numeric, the factor, etc., by beginning to the graph. The aesthetic is the variables that are mapped to aesthetics, which is the aesthetic function maps to the variable to converted them into visual display. So the idea here is that we can apply the x-axis, the y-axis, the color, the fill, the alpha, which is the transparency, the shape, the size, the line type. All of that is part of the aesthetic that we need to have some grammar rules in order for us to apply, in order for us to use ggplot2. So the mapping versus the setting aesthetic is where we lay out for us what is to, how is it going to display and how is it going to allow us to use the ggplot2 to display these graphics. So again, I showed a lot of example of display and how it play out. And again, the first line in the bold, which is the data set, in this case the ggplot, you part of the core for the ggplot package to come in. The data is called milk. The aesthetic is time versus protein, and we're going to see how we are going to play with the data. The aesthetic or the gem point is where the aesthetic come into play. We can have 3 colors, we can have 4 colors, but again, I want you to remember that the coordinating system is in the background in order for us to map it or to apply that. And again, this is where the ggplot come into play. Back to our subject, which is the correlation analysis. So in this case, I'm calling the library and I'm going to call shape, and it will give me a result like that in order for me to see the idea. Another way for looking at correlation is talking about regression. That's one variable that affects the other one, which means that there is a idea of considering that it is not a pure causality, but there is a correlation between them. So one data set, there is no relationship, weak relationship, as we saw in correlation. And again, this is something that we always like to see with regard to how we apply that. And best line always give us where it's all the distribution is with that regard. When we are doing that in ggplot2, I'm using a data set called iris. So if I will display the iris, this is the set. And if I will apply the iris into ggplot2, I will call it, this is the code. You will have the code in Canvas and your assignment, and you will be able to form something like that with other ggplot2. It will be black and white and no colors attached to it, and this is what we will come. The ggplot2 allowed us to add a more dimensional, a more storytell to this type of visualization, and again, this is the power of what it is all about. Our textbook, when he talks about correlation and regression, he talks about using a grid line to enhance the comparison between the scatter plots. In R, there's many ways to do that. So I will use basic example with a plot of X and Y, and you will see that in your assignment. So as your assignment for next time is just do your first ggplot2 in open source R. You will get for me a lot of links that is considered for how to create a function, how to import data, and you will get the data from me, or you have your own data and how to do that. And and you're going to play with that. What I'm asking you is to modify it based on your understanding of the textbook that we are reading about the visual analytics, and see if it makes sense, and play with that and introduce yourself to the ggplot2. In the coming week, after we will settle down a little bit more, I will also upload the next quiz, but I will also start talking about the final project and trying to see if I can help you to come up with the ideas. And if you want to hear my voice, please send me email or come talk to me. So that's all, folks. I hope you enjoy that. I hope you have a nice weekend, and let's have more ggplot2. Bye.